Good morning, Ag Ed students. It's Mrs. Woodbury. Today I'm going to do a short video on mixing up some bread dough. One of the main things about mixing this bread dough up that I want to show you is the consistency that you should have when the dough is done. And so I have here, as I have this recipe that is written in my grandma's hand. So this is kind of special to me, and I just got it. And so this is, the recipe calls for milk or water, a cup, a package of Red Star yeast, but I'm just going to use 1 teaspoon, 2 tablespoons of sugar, a half teaspoon of salt, a 1/4 cup of lard, but I don't have lard processed right now, so I'm just going to use plain old canola oil, and any kind of oil will do just fine, and about 3 cups of flour. So what I've done is I've gone and mixed the flour up into this bowl, or I've measured it out into this bowl, and I put about 2.5 of the 3 cups in, and I left about a 1/2 cup off to the side because I don't want. One time when I made this, it was too dry and the buns were just not that great, and so I'm just going to add in this 1/2 cup as needed. And so what I've done is I've put most of my flour into the bowl. I'm going to warm my milk up in the microwave just for a few seconds, about 30 seconds. I don't want it hot. I want it warm, lukewarm. And lukewarm is when you can stick your finger into the liquid and you can kind of feel that it's there, but it's not really, you can just kind of feel that it's there. It doesn't feel warm really on your finger at all. And while that's working, I'm going to go ahead and add my 2 tablespoons of sugar. There's 1. There's 2. So this is a little bit of a sweet dough. There's lots of recipes out there. If you don't want to add the sugar, you don't have to. So this is a packet of yeast identical to the one that I sent you. If I can get that open. And there's this yeast should really be added to the liquid and let to kind of proof for a little bit. It needs to activate. We don't really need to let it proof, but we do need to put it in the liquid. So I can feel that my milk is just barely warm. And it's just, if you have too much heat in your milk or water, it will kill the yeast if it's above 120 degrees. I would rather have it too cool and have it take longer to rise than to have it too warm. So I'm just going to go ahead and measure out a teaspoon of the yeast, put it in here, and I'm going to just let this sit here and work. I'm going to add just a tiny sprinkle of sugar. Make sure you put your yeast back in the fridge or set it aside somewhere. I'm going to add just a tiny sprinkle of sugar. So yeast is yeast. It's not a bacteria. It's not a fungus. It's yeast. And it feeds on sugar and, some kind of sugars. So there are sugars in the dough that it will feed on, or in the flour that it will feed on eventually. But to get it going, it's helpful if you put just a little bit of sugar in there, maybe just a teaspoon or so. You can also put honey in. You can also substitute honey or pretty much any other sweetener for the sugar if you want for this recipe. Okay, and it's not going to show a whole lot of growth by the time I get this recipe done, but we'll just leave that sit there. Okay, so I've got my sugar in here. I'm going to put in a 1/4 cup of oil, and again, you can use lard, Crisco, butter, anything you want. That's a 1/4 cup of oil in there. I'm going to run this over to the sink real quick. And I'm going to pause this video for just about 5 minutes and just leave that yeast to sit for a little bit, and I'll be back. it might not look like it, but this yeast has changed and it's starting to react to the water already. So I'm going to go ahead and start mixing up my bread. In the meantime, I've got the oven turned on and I'm warming it up, and it just feels warm in here. It says it's 195 degrees. I'm going to go ahead and turn that off because I want my oven to be warm, not hot. Again, if it's too hot, it will kill the yeast. So I've got my spoon here. This spoon came from my family. It got run through a grinder one time. See how it bent that spoon? Yeah, don't stick your fingers in a grinder. All right, let's just take and get all of this yeast off of this little measuring spoon because I want all that yeast in my dough. And I'm just going to pour all this in here. Okay, let's review the ingredients. So I've got milk, yeast, sugar, salt, oil in place of lard, and flour. And I'm just mixing it up. And as you can see, it's starting to get fairly thick. So when we did the no knead dough in class, it got to probably about this consistency, and then we just left it to sit. This is a kneaded dough, kneaded and raised. And so this dough needs to get a little tighter than that. We need to be able to actually knead the dough. And so, and kneading does a few things. It helps move the water around, helps to develop the gluten, and it helps to start developing actually some air pockets inside the dough. And of course, we're working with a good clean counter. Shoot, guess what I forgot? I forgot salt. So I've got a half a teaspoon of salt here. With all the knead, it's definitely best to mix this in with your flour. But with all the kneading that I'm going to do, this will be fine. I'll mix it in here good and we won't have salty spots. But avoid that. Mix the salt in with your flour right away. Okay. Good clean hands, good clean surface. I'm using Dakota Made all-purpose flour for this particular loaf. Earlier this week, I used Gold Medal all-purpose flour, and I did not like the way my bread turned out. I didn't like it at all. What I did is I did a little bit of research on the different kinds of all-purpose flour, and I discovered that Gold Medal all-purpose flour is only about, I think it was 10.5% protein, and Dakota Made is like 11.7 on the all-purpose. And so that's one of the reasons why it turned out so different from what I was used to, because I'm used to the Dakota Made flour. And that has a higher protein content, which affects the way it absorbs water, and it affects the elasticity of the bread. So the bread that I ended up with was more like a biscuit or a muffin. It was quite crumbly. I mean, it tasted fine, but it wasn't what I was used to. So I'm glad that I left out all of this flour, and it's looking like I'm not going to use any of it. So when I squeeze this, I don't have any dough stuck to my hands at all. I can feel the oil in it. When I used the Gold Medal flour, I used all 3 cups, and it was still almost a little bit softer than I like. So this is what I'm doing with the kneading, is I'm just doing a push and fold, push and fold. And I'm going to keep kneading this for probably another couple of minutes. And then what we'll do, so this dough has quite a bit of oil in it. It has a 1/4 cup of oil for basically 1 loaf of bread. So when I'm done here, I'm just going to set this back into the bowl that it came from, which already has a little bit of oil on the surface of it. You can take and use your fingers and put just a little bit of oil in there. You can take and spray your bowl and the top of your loaf with Pam if you think it's needed. or if you're using a recipe that doesn't have any oil in it, it's really not necessary for this recipe. Yeah, you can hear my counter squeaking a little bit. You really do have to, you kind of get a workout when you're kneading dough. And that's a good thing. It's not a bad thing at all. Again, this recipe, you can take and form this into buns. It'll make, maybe 8 or 10 buns. It depends on how big you make them. You can form it into one regular size loaf or 2 mini loaves. I'm going to form this into 2 kind of mini loaves, free-form things, because if you don't have bread pans, you're going to want to be able to still make a loaf of bread. I will also show you how to form a bun when I'm done here, but I'm going to actually just bake this into buns, or into kind of a rustic bread loaf. Okay, I think that's good. Notice how kind of smooth this is and everything. I'm just going to set it back in my bowl. And this lid happens to fit nicely. You can use a plate. You can use plastic wrap. It doesn't matter too much. You do want it covered because otherwise the bread will get kind of dry. And I'm going to set this in the oven for probably an hour. And I'll set a timer for 30 minutes. And I'll come back in 30 minutes and see how it looks. And later on, we'll form this up and bake some bread. See you later. It's been almost 40 minutes. Let's take a look at this. So this is a little bit warm. If it's so warm that you can't touch the bowl, it's probably warm enough that it's killing your yeast. So be careful with that. You can see that this bread has about doubled. And you can see the difference in, the way it handles. I'm going to, what time is it? I'm just going to let this go for another 20 minutes, even though I already poked some holes in it. I'm going to let it go for another 20 minutes, and then I'll form it for one of my classes. So we'll be back. It's time to form the loaves. I'm going to use my kitchen scale. I'm going to see just how much I have here. And I just want to divide it into 2 even loaves. And it's not necessary to use a scale. I just want to see how much this actually is. And so this bread is going to get punched down anyway. So it doesn't hurt to, kind of crush it. That doesn't matter. And I have 1 pound, 8.3 ounces. So I'm going to go for 12 ounces each, I guess. And you can see this is pretty soft. This is a little softer than what I'm used to. There is 12.2 ounces and 12.1 ounce, should be 12.1 each. Okay, so to form this into a loaf, I'm just going to take and fold it in, take that little bit, stick it inside there, fold it in on itself like this. And I actually like to work back on my counter because that helps to get it all nice and smooth. Kind of tuck the end in and seal it down there on the bottom. and set it on the pan. There we go. And then I'll do the same with the other one. If I was going to do a bun, I would take off about maybe 3 or 4 ounces of dough. Depends on how big you want your buns to be. And I would do the same thing, except I would make it round. I usually just use my hand when I'm making buns. I guess I said I was going to show you how to make a bun, and I lied. There. We have 2 slim loaves. We've got one more thing to do. Just going to take a simple paring knife. I'm just going to cut across these. Give it a little slice here. This isn't necessary at all. It's just kind of fun. Doesn't matter how many cuts you make. Just makes it look a little decorative. Back into the warm oven this goes until they about double in size, and then we'll bake.